Hello, third grade, and welcome to Math Lesson 10-3. In this lesson, we're going to focus on using different properties that we've learned before to help us multiply. Let's go ahead and watch our short video lesson, and then we'll get into our notes and our guided practice together.
How can you use properties to multiply by multiples of 10? Think about that question during the lesson. How can you find the product of 4 times 20? You know how to use an open number line to model multiplication. What does the number line show? 4 jumps of 20. Where does the last jump end?
Select your answer.
The last jump ends at 80. You can also use properties to explain a rule for finding a product when one factor is a multiple of 10. One way is to use the associative property of multiplication to group the factors. Think of 20 as 2 times 10. So 4 times 20 equals 4 times the quantity 2 times 10. Does it matter if you multiply 4 times 2 first or 2 times 10 first?
Select your answer.
Now here we need to stop and think about the properties that we've learned. Now we know the associative property tells us that we can group our numbers in any order, which means we can pick any of the numbers that we want to multiply and start with those first, and then we can multiply by our other factors. So here, it shouldn't matter if we're going to do 4 times 2 first, or if we're going to do 2 times 10 first. Since we're not changing any of the factors, based on the associative property, we're allowed to start with any of the two that we want. So for our question here, it says, does it matter if you multiply 4 times 2 first or 2 times 10 first? No, it does not matter.
No, the associative property of multiplication says the grouping of the factors does not matter. So you can say 4 times 20 equals the quantity 4 times 2 times 10. Since 4 times 2 equals 8, that means 4 times 20 equals 8 times 10. Remember the tens facts pattern. Think about the product of a number and 10. The product has a 0 in the ones place. The other factor is written to the left of the 0. So 4 times 20 equals 80. You can also use the distributive property to decompose a factor. Since 4 equals 2 plus 2, 4 times 20 equals the quantity 2 plus 2 times 20. So, by the distributive property, 4 times 20 equals 2 times 20 plus 2 times 20. That means 4 times 20 equals 40 plus 40. So 4 times 20 equals 80. How is the distributive property different from the associative property of multiplication?
Okay, let's take a look at these two different ways that we were able to solve this problem. We decomposed it using the distributive property, which means we broke one of our factors apart into the two pieces that we could use to make it. So for here, they decomposed 4 into 2 plus 2. Now you could have also decomposed it into 3 plus 1 if you wanted to, but they chose 2 plus 2 because 2 is an easy number to work with. Now, then they multiplied each one of those 2's times 20 and got their answer. But for the associative property, what they did was they didn't decompose one factor into the sum of two of its parts. They took one factor and they divided it, or they broke it down into your number times the group of 10 that we're working with. So instead of doing 4 times 20, they did 4 times 2 groups of 10s. And then they grouped it further by saying 4 times 2 first to find the 8, then multiplied that by the group of 10s. So we had 8 10s, which makes 80. Both of these strategies are useful and both of them can be used. You don't necessarily need to use both. You can pick the one that's easier for you, but both of them are available and they're helpful to help you break down a problem that may be difficult to solve on its own.
The associative property of multiplication says that you can change the grouping of the factors. The distributive property decomposes a factor. Now you know how to use properties to multiply.
Great job!
Okay, let's go ahead and get into our notes and our guided practice for this lesson. Now, our notes for 10-3 use properties to multiply. Our question that we're focusing on is how can you use properties to multiply by multiples of 10? Now, for the associative property, like we said, remember that this property tells you that you can group your numbers in any way and your product stays the same. So if we're trying to find the product of 3 times 60, that's the same thing as saying 3 times 6 groups of 10. 3 times 6 groups of 10, we can regroup that and say 3 times 6 and then multiply that by the tens. And I know from my basic facts that 3 times 6 is 18. 18 times a group of 10 is going to give me my answer. I know anything times 10 just has a 0 thrown onto the end of it. So 18 groups of 10 is 180, which tells us that 3 times 60, which was our original question, is equal to 180. Now we can also solve the same problem using the distributive property. The distributive property tells you that you can decompose or break apart a number into smaller parts to make it easier to work with. So here for 3 times 60, I decomposed or I distributed the 3 into a group of 2 and then a group of 1. And then multiply that by 60. So 2 times 60 plus 1 times 60, which is 60. So that 3 times 60 became the 2 times 60, which is 120, plus 1 times 60, which is 60. 120 plus 60 is 180. So 3 times 60 here was 180. Now let's do a different problem. We want to find the product of 5 times 90, and I want to show it using both properties. So I have my associative property listed, and I have my distributive property listed. For my associative property, 5 times 90 is the same thing as saying 5 times 9 groups of 10, or 9 times 10. I'm going to regroup these. I'm going to move my parentheses. So instead of doing 5 times 90 is equal to 5 times in parentheses 9 times 10, I'm going to put the parentheses around to the 5 times 9, which tells me that's what I'm going to solve first. And then I'll multiply by 10 after. So 5 times 9 gave me 45 times a group of 10, which tells me that 5 times 9 is 400. 5 times 90 is 450. Remember, any number times 10, you're just throwing a 0 onto the end of it. Now, if I wanted to do this using the distributive property, 5 times 90, I decomposed my 5 into 3 plus 2, because 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. And then I'm going to multiply those by 90. So 3 times the 90 plus 2 times the 90. I know from my basic facts, 3 times 9 is 27. So 3 times 90 is 270. And my basic facts here, 2 times 9 is 18. So 2 times 90 is 180. 270 plus 180 will also give me 450. I'm going to arrive at the same sum. I'm just doing it 2 different ways. And one way may be easier for you than the other way, and that's okay. So I put up another example to find 6 times 40, also using both properties. So my associative is still here on the same side where my associative was in the last problem, and the distributive is on the other side. 6 times 40 is the same thing as 6 times 4 groups of 10, or 4 times 10. I decided to do the 6 times 4 first and then multiply all of that by 10. I know that 6 times 4 is equal to 24. 24 times 10 is 240. So 6 times 40 is equal to 240. Now, if I wanted to do this using the distributive property, I'm going to distribute my 6 into 3 plus 3 and multiply each one of those 3 times 40. Now I know from my basic facts, 3 times 4 is 12. So 3 times 40 is 120. So that gives me 120 plus 120, which again leads me to my same answer of 240. For our guided practice, it says, why can you say that 3 times 20 is the same thing as saying 2 times 20 plus another group of 20? Well, I can say this because a distributive property allowed me to decompose 3 into 2 plus 1. So 3 times 20 is the same thing as saying 2 times 20 plus 1 times 20, or just saying 3 times 20 is equal to 2 times 20 plus 20, because that 1 times 20 is just equal to 20. For number 2, why can you say that 3 times 20 is the same thing as 3 times 2 times a group of 10? Well, I can say this because the associative property tells me that I can group my numbers in any way, and I'm going to get to the same product. So 3 times 20 is the same thing as saying 3 times 2 groups of 10, or 2 times 10. And then I'll change my grouping so that my parentheses are around my 3 times 2 first, and then times a group of 10, all of which will get me to the same product. For numbers 3 and 4, we were filling in the missing numbers. So for number 3, they showed us how to solve this problem using the associative property, and number 4, they used the distributive property. So 9 times 60 is the same thing as saying 9 times 6 times 10, or 6 groups of 10. I'm going to move my parentheses around the 9 times 6, which gives me 54, and then multiply that by a group of 10, which led me to 540. And for our final question, number 4, 4 times 90, I distributed my 4 into 2 plus 2 times 90. So 2 times 90, I'm going to use my basic facts. I know 2 times 9 is 18. So 2 times 90 is 180. 180 plus 180 gets me to 360. That's it for this lesson. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day, 3rd grade. Take care. Bye-bye.